Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Breakfast with Bobby. I'm Christina Bloom. I am one of your two hosts. I'm here with my friend Bobby Klebano, who is my co-host, and our friend Markus Kasunich. God, I hope I said that right.
You did.
So, we're going to be talking about spiritual posturing and spiritual bypassing. And there was one other thing that I forgot, but whatever, we're going to get to it all. So, Bobby, how you doing
Yes,
today?
I'm great. Hey, you know what? I'm a new grandma. I just had to share that.
I know. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Oh, he's beautiful. He's just a little peanut and he's gorgeous. Anyway, let's move on. Uh, I'm so glad that you offered to come back, Marcus. We have a lot of really important information to get to today. The other topic that I'm interested in hearing about, the inauthentic handler, but I'm also interested in hearing about mystical schools. There's so much of that that's popping up these days. You're not really sure what it is, where it is, how much training these people have, any of that kind of stuff. So um, let me read a little bit of your bio so people know who you are and
Sure.
remind them who you are. Um, Marcus has been a holistic life and relationship coach, a keynote speaker, author, spiritual teacher. Marcus has accumulated more than 40,000 hours of coaching with individuals, entrepreneurs, couples, families, and businesses in over 20 years of practice. He facilitates in-person and online courses, events, retreats, and workshops. Marcus has so much experience and so much training in the holistic personality IRAM, a map for creating consciousness relationships. This is one of the most special people that I've ever met, and I am so grateful and so honored that you offered to come back and talk with us today. So welcome again, Marcus, for coming in. We just appreciate your time and effort. So
Yeah,
please
Thank you.
do.
welcome.
More.
Thank you for having me. I really, it's always fun to be here. It's really beautiful platform.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks. Yeah, we just invited the whole world to breakfast with us. That's all.
And most of the time, we don't even care who's listening. And
Nope.
sometimes, sometimes it gets interesting, not gonna lie. So, I'm in your class, in your IRAM class, and one of the archetypes that we talk about is the inauthentic handler.
Right.
And I do examine myself periodically, and I was thinking before we started the show today, have I ever been inauthentic? And I'm sure that periodically I have been. I think we all have been. Um, I think sometimes we pretend to be someone we're not. So I'm hoping that you can help iron that out and identify some ways that we can uh, combat that sort of personality issue. And then I'd
Sure.
love for you to talk about some other stuff that you want to talk about.
Okay. Sure. So like when we talk about the personality structure, the relative personality structure, we're talking about the way I kind of broke it down in terms of helping people understand to create a map to go inside is there's the contractive side of our personality, right? By the way, everyone has a fragmented personality. There's not a human being on the planet. It's another way of saying there's not a human being on the planet that doesn't have an ego, right? A lot of spiritual teachings are like kill the ego, kill the ego. Well, I mean, it's more effective and efficient and helpful for an individual to integrate and learn and have an intimate relationship with your ego structure, your positive ego structure, which I call expansion, and your negative ego structure, which is contraction. So the way I broke this down, because I wanted to create a map, and again, let's be clear, this is one of the things I find is missing in the spiritual world, because a lot of people go out in the spiritual world and they do their thing, but they've never really examined their personality structure. And no matter how many spiritual experiences you have as a being, and people can have profound openings and experiences, every way that you're going to filter your relationship to understanding your spiritual world has to come through your personality structure. So if you have an immature personality structure, if you've never done any self-investigation of who you are, then the way you interpret your spiritual experiences will also be immature. So having done work in the spiritual world for many, many years, I really came to the conclusion that most people, and this includes enlightened beings and gurus that I've spent time with over the years, haven't done any inner work to examine their own personality structure, shadow work, inner child work, right? So everything below the line, contractively, we call the wounded inner child. And listen, most people function from their wounds. They're not aware of it, but that's influencing so many of their behaviors and almost every relationship they have. They're just not aware of it. And often people are functioning from their shadow. Now, shadow and your wounded child and your shadow are not bad. They're just part of the fragmentation of what our personality structure looks like. So a lot of people talk about this idea of like wanting to have all these experiences, but remember, have you not examined, if you don't have some kind of awareness of your inner world, your personality, everything you understand from the spiritual world will be filtered through whatever level of maturity you have as a being. So I broke it down into 4 categories, right? Below the line is the wounded inner child. This is what you've been conditioned with as part of your structure growing up. By the time you're 7 years old, you've already been conditioned. You've conditioned with all of the different things that have happened to you, your inner wounds, things that you've literally absorbed from your environment, from your family of origin, and from your culture and society, all these different beliefs and ideas. So there's a wounded side of it, and then there's the shadow side of it. That's all below the line. That's conditioned in you already. It's not going away. You're not going to get rid of it. You can't make it go away. And people say, I want to heal those parts. And I'm like, how you heal those parts is you become intimately aware of what you're capable of, how you function in your wounds and in your shadow. And then you learn how to create tools when that stuff comes up in you to be able to deal with it in a very mature way. So that's below the line. Above the line is the radiant inner child, which is basically all the access to your divinity, all the different parts of your radiant essence. And that radiant essence of who you are is very hard to maintain if you haven't developed the mature inner adult, which is the mature structure. So both those structures above the line support and create medicine and tools for you to be able to, when you dive and you understand some of the wounds and the shadow parts of your consciousness, that's the way that you kind of work with your inner structure. So having seen that the spiritual world doesn't really deal with this in a very particular way, and when I say the spiritual world, I mean this goes for shamanic principles, this goes for a lot of shamanic principles, some of it touches some of this, but not always. And this also talks for yogic principles and specific parts of enlightened consciousness. I've met beings who haven't done any inner work. And therefore, that shadow permeates into all of the spiritual things you end up doing. And then people, that's a very dangerous thing, because somebody could have talent, they could have spiritual gifts, they could have siddhas, but they haven't done any inner work. So they could be very much a shadow teacher, because they're coming and they're all the stuff from them that they haven't explored in their consciousness is influencing the way they work and perform and function in the world. So even if they have talent, even if they have siddhas, even if they have gifts, the part of you haven't done inner work to explore this part of yourself, then that could be influencing the way you function, not only the way you see your spiritual experiences and interpret them, but the way you perform and function as a teacher. So for me, this is part of the commitment of being a teacher and being able to work with people, is the training, the intention to go inside and not only explore these parts of yourself, to become very intimate with these parts of you, so that then it doesn't influence unconsciously in your behavior when you're out there helping people.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself, because for years, and I've been doing this probably as long as you have, for years, I have been watching this happen over and over and over and over again. And, that kind of puts those of us who actually do our work in a precarious position, because either we can be told that we're one of those who hasn't done the work, or
Right.
we can be put in a position where if we call it out, then it looks like we're the bad guys,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. This
I don't
happens
know how
all
I
the
know of
time.
another way to say that, but
No,
yeah,
it's a great way to say it.
exactly.
It happens all the time in the spiritual world. So one of the things
Mhm.
that, Bobby, that you brought up was the inauthentic handler. This is my kind of one of the archetypes of the shadow, and really the inauthentic handler. And not everybody. Like, let's be clear, we're not always authentic. Our society has really taught us the posture, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you look at social media and branding, the whole concept of branding is creating a persona. So if you look at our society and the way we commoditize attention and talent and even spiritual gifts, people have been taught to posture in the world to create a brand, an identity, which is not necessarily who they are, right? Because it's a marketable brand. So in the commoditizing of our spiritual world, the inauthentic handler has become very prominent, specifically on social media, because you and I, we all know that people who on social, they have a vision of who they are on social media. That's not always what happens in real life, right? It's not necessarily authentically what's going on. So our society's taught us to posture this way, and that, what is it doing? It's increasing the attention, commoditizing our attention, and people have been trained unconsciously in the world to brand themselves and posture and create a facade in a particular way. So this is a lot more widespread than we want to often really admit, and it's rampant in the spiritual community, rampant, right?
It's getting to the point that you're not even sure who you can trust. And it's not only in spirituality, it's everywhere.
And exactly, it is everywhere. Politicians. I mean,
yes.
What about all the evangelists we've seen over the last 20 years who they live in like $15, $20 million mansions while they're doing all these faith healings on people? It's tricky because, and it's even more difficult in the spiritual world because there's the training is not necessarily as organized as different places. And some of the training that we were supposed to get in the ancient times was being in the mystery schools and being in mentorship programs. That's almost all gone because people learn from the internet. They don't even learn through mentorship anymore. And very few people have a teacher, because that's what keeps you accountable in some ways, is the fact that you have somebody outside of yourself who's working with you to make sure that you stay in alignment with consciousness. I mean, I'm always leery of people who don't have a teacher and they're out there teaching, especially when they say, hey, you should coach and teach with me, and then they don't have a teacher. Then, I mean, that's hypocritical to a certain degree, right? So, I mean, I find it really challenging because having been a coach and a teacher and having lived in an ashram for 11 years and studied with gurus and enlightened beings and done insane amounts of mentorship, I find it really challenging when I open up the internet and people are literally popping off a weekend course and then going out and teaching stuff with no integration of what they're learning. So the inauthentic handler is one of those shadow qualities, and it is a byproduct of inauthenticity. And the way I would define it is this: like, posturing is defined as like a speech or a behavior that's artificial. It's either hypocritical, but it's really calculated to mislead. Right? It's intended to attract attention and interest, and it makes people believe something that's not necessarily true. And it's often used to uplift someone's status or their credibility. And it's often, you could see it as grandstanding, showing off, and attention seeking, which of course is prominent on social media, right? That's how because everyone's garnering for your attention. So you can see posturing is a huge thing. It's a big deal. And I mean, it'll include, I'll give you some things it includes. This is like the inauthentic handler. It includes name dropping. It includes credibility by association. We can explore some of these things because I think they're really good. Parroting information, copying and misappropriating people's content, boasting, grandstanding, and almost all of it's done under the guise of this healing thing. But really, when it comes down to it, it's look at me, see what I know, see what I can do, see how important I am because I associated and studied with this particular individual. And these kind of people who have this thing going on that they've never explored or that they're propagating because society encourages this individual may even lie and mislead you into misrepresenting the significance of their associations with other people. Right? So
don't you think a lot of that has to do with money also? Is it more?
A lot of it has to do with money. It's a combination of money and attention, right? But that's greed and ego. It's the desire to stand out and create an uplifted version of yourself. And oftentimes it's used to garner attention, followers, money, and that is it is. And the thing that makes it really dangerous is it's intentionally designed to mislead. Right? The person it's calculated. It's not, listen, if we want to look at this part of the shadow, this is the sociopathic part of the shadow, right? Because they don't usually have remorse. They don't really care about what they do to people. It's really about, it really is more about the individual than it is about what they're offering, right?
Yeah. And I just kind of want to offer the flip side of that. Okay.
Please, please.
So the flip side of that is that people like you or me, we are out there, we want to help people. We
Right.
have put time and energy and probably a lot of money too into healing our wounds, into discovering our shadow sides as far as we can discover it up to this point and continuing to do so. And we want to be able to help people, but the thing is, we can't help people if they can't find us. So what do? We put ourselves out there. And so that's where what Bobby said, who do you trust?
Who
How
you
do you
trust.
how do you know who to trust? Because we're all kind of doing the same thing, because
Right.
I can't help people who can't find me, right? So the thing that really comes down to it though is learning how, through our own inner work, is learning how to trust ourselves to make those decisions,
Right.
Absolutely. I mean,
you know?
if the teacher's not pointing you back to being self-empowered and giving you tools to
Exactly.
discover who you are, then usually they're either developing they're creating a dependence, so you have a dependence on them, or
Hmm.
it's really about them, it's not about you. So,
Right.
I mean, I always say if your teacher is not pointing you back and giving you tools and uplifting you to help you discover the most refined version of who you could be, then usually it's really about something else, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
and you'll notice there's a lot of grandstanding, a
Oh, yeah.
lot of people out there, and the thing is this particular part of the shadow is a master of deception, right?
It
Because
is.
they might often on the surface they may say all the right things, tell you all the right stories. They might demonstrate and even elevate their position and their abilities. They know all the right people. They're involved in all the right communities. So, like Bobby said, it's like, who do you trust? How do you
Right.
work with them? Right?
Exactly.
The thing the thing that is really how you can identify this is that posturing is not an embodied teaching, right? It's often head. It's often like, like those preachers who pontificate on their platforms. It's all theory. It's all head. They're talking. It's all this. They're when they're doing this whole thing. You don't feel the authenticity of what they're saying because it's a sales pitch,
Right.
right?
Right.
So like any good hustle or sales pitch, like there's a limit to how deep an individual can go. And if you stay with somebody who's got this going on and you're not aware of it, and you keep diving in, you will eventually it'll get uncovered. Because the other thing about the inauthentic handlers, they're really arrogant. They seem to think they can fool everybody, and they could become very bold and very reckless and cavalier about the way they're working and about their presentation, right? And you can hear it in their language. I mean, again, listen, I have been duped by many a spiritual teacher in my process. If you've been engaging with any teachers over the years as part of your training, you've met a lot of people who are doing this posturing. And
Yes.
sometimes it takes a little while. And as you kind of investigate your process to figure out wait a second, I don't align to the values of this individual. Like they may be posturing one set of values, but their behavior is exhibiting another set of values.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky thing. You're like, well, how do we figure it out? How do we know who to work with, right? Part
Well,
of it
and
is,
we are
go ahead.
intuitive, being intuitive people, and all of a sudden you're not catching it. But after a while, like you said, and I'm not going to lie, I have been, approached by many, and I've gotten to the point where I don't trust much of anything. And then all of a sudden you let yourself go and you're like, okay, I think I can trust that, only to find out you can't. So it's like, what the heck?
But there's something powerful about that too. I want to bring that up because like having been through that process and having had people manipulate me and teachers and people who I'm working with who've done some of these things we're talking about, what it does is it refines you to become more discerning, right? In terms because I get it, it's hard. We look out in the world, how do we trust the politicians and the leaders that we have going on? They posture one thing and then they do a completely different thing in the back end. And I mean, this is we see priests and evangelists who do it. We
Yep.
see
Hmm.
business owners who do it. I mean, we live in a fairly corrupt world, let's be clear. I'm not trying to build this like doom and gloom, but if you've done enough inner work or you're in the process of investigating, eventually there will be red flags. And the problem is we don't want to believe the red flags because
Right.
especially spiritual people with an open heart and a desire to grow and learn, there's a hunger there for something. And we don't want to believe, we want hope. We don't want to believe necessarily that somebody in that position who's teaching spiritual learning, or psychologist for that matter, because I've seen it there too. I
Yeah.
mean, anyone who's in a position of helping you, we don't want to believe that they have the capacity to do that. But it is an aspect of the shadow, right? Everybody has all the aspects of the shadow, but some people have more things activated than others depending on their conditioning. So unfortunately, like you said, because it's a world of money, and because, like you said, Christina, we have to demonstrate and put ourselves out there, because as a spiritual teacher, you kind of also have to be a business person to a degree.
Right.
How do you trust and what do you know? And I would tell people, vet your teachers, vet them. And even if you vet them, and everybody makes errors in this process. And so having had this happen, it refines you to become more and more and more discerning. And it doesn't mean you're not going to get duped, and it doesn't mean you're not going to get fooled, but your devotion and love and desire to grow is not in question. And even if you end up with somebody who is not really there for your highest good, that doesn't take away from your hunger as a being to learn and grow, right?
Right.
I mean, it's you can consider it a powerful learning if you've been involved with somebody who's done this to you. It's
Right.
because it does make you, and unfortunately, it also makes people feel very jaded, because then they become jaded about the whole thing. But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You want to be able to look at that and say, okay, there are this goes for all species and all life forms. There are contractive and very benevolent beings in all experiences of life, but there are also beings that don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. And you can, if you pay attention and you watch and you learn, you will eventually the arrogance of the inauthentic handler will eventually show itself. It
Yeah.
will, right? It just
Yeah.
takes time. Sometimes it takes time, but it's difficult. It's difficult to identify because, listen, they may actually have talent. They may actually have gifts. But the problem is they haven't done enough shadow work. We talked about that they haven't gone
Right.
in. They don't know their own shadows. So even if they have talent, they have gifts, they have siddhas, and they can offer you value, the greed, the inauthenticity, the arrogance, the selfishness, the inauthenticity will eventually permeate into those talents and gifts, and it'll make them less than they could be, right?
Right.
So that's the challenge. It's like, well, I mean, I was with a spiritual guru who had like incredible transmission of energy, but that had done no inner work and was doing some deeply, profoundly shadowed stuff on the back end. And I mean, it's then as a spiritual seeker, you're like, but I'm getting all of this incredible energy. And yet this guy is doing some stuff on the back end that's really dangerous and very, very shadow. And then you have to deal with your own personal integrity and say, do I want to just get what I can get here? Or do I allow into the values of what that teacher's offering? Because eventually someone's values will show up. They will.
Yes. They
You
Yeah.
will.
know, it may
When I
take
was
some time, even past the posturing and the story and whatever's going on. And I often call I often call them shadow teachers, because they may have talent, they may be good at what they're doing to a degree, but if the shadow hasn't been really effectively examined, if they haven't really understood what they're capable of, if whatever human being's capable of, and they haven't have an intimate relationship with it, and it's permeating into what they're doing, then they're actually somehow doing more harm than good, because it eventually becomes about them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it is, again, the other thing, one of the powerful tactics of the inauthentic handler or someone who's posturing is half truths, right? I mean, the most powerful way to lie is to give a little bit of truth in the lie, right? And so that's the best way they have to mislead you in the story they're selling. They'll often kind of do half truths or omission of a whole bunch of stuff, right? Because that's a form of lying, and misleading is to omit stuff as well. So, I mean, again, it is something that if we continue to stay engaged and you pay attention and you want to look at the values of the teacher, not what they say their values are, what their behavior exhibits their values as being.
That takes a
Because
lot of time to
it
discover all of
can,
that.
it
It
can, but
does.
you get more sophisticated at it as you become as deep, as more of a seeker you become, the more sophisticated you become at being able to track that. But even in that sophistication, even for me, having been through different things for, I mean, so many years, this has been my life. I have been fooled like everybody else.
Yeah.
you know? And I mean,
So
and go ahead.
do you find then, like you mentioned earlier, do you find then that you just sort of distance yourself from those people? I mean, because you're learning something. I mean, you have to draw the line on what's valuable, what isn't, how much do you need, what did you come for? And then eventually sever the relationship, or
It's
it's
tricky.
such a, yeah,
It's tricky. I will say this for me personally, having had this experience happen as a student many, many times, my modus operandi is distance myself from the individual, because if my values do not align to the values of the individual I'm working with, no matter what kind of talent they have, eventually their character, their personality, and their belief systems will filter into what they're teaching. And how do I trust the teachings they're offering, that they're actually for me and they're not just a form of posturing to make themselves look good or to garner more finances,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I mean, it's tricky in that sense. But then again, the other thing that happens as somebody who's had that happen, you also often have to, as far as self-respect and boundaries are concerned, you may have to say and do something in order to like restore integrity. Like, let's just say you've been manipulated. In my particular case, I had an individual steal a bunch of content from me and then posture as a teacher and coach, and then tell individuals that they were actually endorsed and that they were partnering with me. So how do I handle a situation like that, right? Like, I mean, we then have to draw boundaries, yes, and not have anything to do with the individual, but you might have to also have to restore integrity. And that is unique for every individual, how you have to restore integrity. A lot of people have to take legal action. It's not the first time people have to take legal action against somebody who's stolen content, right? Because if you spend 20 years, like I did, writing a book and then testing it for another 10 years before you put it public, and then someone takes it and says, hey, this teacher's endorsed me as a teacher and they're partnering with me and I know what I'm doing, that's illegal.
yeah.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So
I've written content as well for people that I worked with, and then severed the relationship, and I wanted my information back. And yeah, it gets messy and it gets
it's messy.
ugly, and it's so disappointing that, at the end of the day, it just becomes selfish and it's about your ego. And more so, it's
Yeah.
about money,
It often is about money.
unfortunately. Yeah.
And the thing is that, but the thing is a lot of people, a lot of spiritual people who come into the seeking, we're all seeking, right? We're often at the lowest part of our lives. We're vulnerable. We're in the state where we desperately want help from somebody, and we want hope. And so when you enter into these environments, that individual who's got that going on, that is perfect prey for a grifter, right? For somebody who's gonna con you and do that. But it doesn't. But this is human nature. We live
Right.
in a dualistic reality, and I mean, we have expansive and beautiful beings that are offering so much value. And it yes, it taints the whole spiritual community. It can, but I mean, we have to hold hope that if you are authentic, if you are clean, if you are authentically and sincerely looking for what you need to grow, the universe will present those teachers and opportunities. They will often present some other things so you can learn and grow. And here's the deal. All of those things are opportunities for growth and expansion, even if you've been conned, if you've been duped, or you just have grown to a point where your value system doesn't align to the value system of a lesser teacher, then you move on. That just means you've graduated from having to have that experience, and then you can have the opportunity to create something different because your awareness is more powerfully aligned. You have a deeper relationship with self, and more self-love and self-respect is present. So you're not willing to put yourself in the same positions anymore. I mean, this
Right.
goes for relationships too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
how many of us have stayed in a relationship longer than we should have, right?
Everybody. Yeah.
Until we've gotten burned so bad, you just had to move on. Because
And that is part of the learning process of, and also it's part of our conditioning. Oftentimes, if we've been in an environment where that particular shadow aspect, you've been raised by very narcissistic environment, it becomes normalized. You don't notice it as much in your consciousness because it's familiar. It's not that it's healthy. It's just that you recognize it as familiar. And since it's familiar to you, you may align to somebody who's like that because you haven't explored those things in yourself, and you don't understand unconsciously that familiar, you confuse the familiarity with love or connection. But it's just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's healthy, right?
Right.
Right.
So a lot of people in relationships, if we talk about it in relationships, those people who have been in, they're like, why do I keep creating the same relationship with the same, very like this individual who's very selfish and self-centered and doesn't care about me? You have to examine your own world and say, where did I learn that? Where did that come from? Was that
Mhm.
part of my conditioning growing up? Did you grow up with a narcissistic parent? Did you have a society or a culture where that was big? Because you don't create this out of the blue. There's something in you that is aligned to that, whether being aligned to it, and they notice they're not narcissists like nothing more than somebody who is loving, kind, and beautiful, because that's a perfect opportunity for those two kind of energies to learn from each other. Right.
Yeah.
And the thing with these, authentic shadow teachers is they often surround themselves with really loving, kind, beautiful people, because that is part of perpetuating the story that if you're aligned with all of these people, that you're also a good person. You gotta really pay attention and vet your teachers. And if they haven't done a lot of training and they don't have a teacher and they're not exhibiting values, they might be saying one thing, but their behavior says something else. That's a red flag for you to pay attention and really investigate what you're involved in. Even if they do have value to offer, eventually that shadow aspect of their consciousness will infiltrate whatever talent they have. And that's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. And I've also noticed that teachers like that will surround themselves with only their students.
Mm.
They will not surround themselves with anyone who could be a peer
Right. This is actually a
or,
good point.
someone who can see what they're doing. They don't want that. They only surround themselves with their students who are giving them accolades. And as soon as those students stop, they're out of the picture. I
Yeah,
have
that's
seen
a
that happen so many times.
yeah, because they're in competition because they want to be the star of the show. So they don't know how to really
Right.
collaborate with somebody.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And again, that's the idea of them. If they don't have a teacher, who's keeping them accountable? I mean,
Right.
there's a reason I've had a teacher since I've been 18 years old. I have multiple teachers, and I've always had a mentor because I understand, having done this inner work, having done this inner work, and Bobby, you exploring this inner work, that there's things about yourself that you're not going to see. And
Right.
therefore, you need somebody to hold you accountable. Right.
Right.
But this is where people posture too. They're like, I'm working with this teacher. I'm like, well, what is the nature of your association with that individual that you're watching videos on YouTube? And that's not a mentor, by the way. If you're just watching videos of somebody on YouTube, you're not mentoring with that individual. You're just watching their content. You're taking it in. Or those people who say, I have etheric guides, I have spirit guides. I'm like, that's fantastic. You can get incredible downloads from various life streams, right? But you can also manipulate all of that information based on your egoic structure. You can infiltrate that information can get interpreted in so many different ways.
Well,
Right.
you can
One
talk your way in and out of stuff just in your own head. You can convince yourself of certain things.
Probably true.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Have you ever heard
Yeah.
someone say your guides are telling me ... and then
Yes.
they add on to that a sales pitch?
Yes.
So that's I'm not again, I've worked with psychics for years, and I mean one of the biggest things I have with people who have and I've met with people who have extremely talented. But one of the things is they often interpret the information through the filter of their own personality structure. So I mean, you'll hear guides who make an interpretation of what they've seen, and I'm like, whoa, 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 pause for a second. Just tell me what you saw. Don't give me your interpretation. First, tell me exactly the vision of what you received, and then afterwards say my interpretation of that is this, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which I mean,
Absolutely.
as someone who's very intuitive and a psychic, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Christine.
Yes. And that's actually one of the things that I teach in my program is you really have to be aware of your filters. You really have to be aware of your filters, and that every experience can either create or reinforce a filter.
Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
you can find a way to justify all of your own belief systems, which is
Oh,
why
yeah.
having a teacher will say, hey, wait a second, whoa, 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 let's refine the way you're doing that. Examine the way you're communicating, or even doing enough inner work to understand what you're capable of, how your shadow function, how your wounds function, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Exactly.
that makes a huge difference in terms of someone's talent. I've met extremely talented psychics who filter the information and that the message they end up giving is not necessarily helpful because they've put their spin on what they've seen.
Right. And I think it's a natural thing to do,
Of course.
particularly if you're not aware that everything that goes through a filter, and it goes through all of our filters.
Yeah.
It goes through all of our filters. And the best thing that we can do as spiritual teachers, as psychics, as I don't want to say therapists, but probably more like spiritual guides.
Yeah.
The best thing that we can do is be aware of how clogged up our filters are.
Which is a
You know,
commitment to inner work. It's a
it
commitment to
absolutely is.
it's a
Yes.
commitment to purification, right? On
Hmm.
mind, body, energetic, spiritual, physical purification. So again, if you meet a teacher who doesn't have a teacher, pay attention. Like, who are they working with? Who are they accountable to? Or if they don't have colleagues, if they seem to be the one man show or a one woman show, and they're surrounded by people who are just giving them accolades all the time, who are they collaborating with? Someone who's like this inauthentic handler has a very difficult time collaborating with other individuals. And
Right.
if they're and
Yeah,
that's a
sorry.
very good point to be able to no, it's a good point to be able to notice it.
I was going to say for me, another red flag is teachers who don't meditate.
I would agree with you. I have meditation is connected because it's two different things, right?
Hmm.
Our consciousness is made up of the relative world, which is all energy, emotions, mind, consciousness, other realities. All of that is relative, and the physical body. And then there's this whole side of us that I often call it the self. And in Ayurvedic teachings and Hindu teachings and Sanskrit teachings, they call it the absolute. It's the place that's unmanifested beyond all of your relative experience. And when people become enlightened, they often create this powerful, profound relationship to this absolute part of their consciousness, which is unmanifested, beyond relative, not known by the mind. We can call it the soul, the Atma. We can call it I wouldn't even call it the higher self, by the way. I would
Yeah.
call it, you can call it that, but it is beyond all relativity. And when you meditate, when you're going deep into meditation practices, the intention is to connect to that, right?
Yes.
And then that kind of starts to, as you continue to develop your relationship to that, that changes the way you explore your relative. So, I mean, a lot of gurus I've met have done all of that work and no relative work. And then I've seen a lot of
Interesting.
people, teachers, do all that relative work and none of that work. So for
Yeah.
me, the powerful thing is to be able to, like you said, is to have a process where you're deepening into self and not just sitting in silence. That's a good start. But I mean,
Right.
often when we sit in silence, we're going to get everything. You're going to get your feelings, your emotions, your thoughts. You're going to get all that conditioned stuff inside of you. It takes time to kind of permeate through and swim through all of that relative part to touch that part of consciousness. But the intention and sincerity to it will often give you an opportunity to taste that. But people who don't do any kind of self meditative practices to commune to that are living exclusively in the relative world.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I feel like the most powerful thing for teachers is the meditation part that deepens you into self and gives you access to this aspect of us that is untouched by anything that ever happens, unwounded, untouched, even really unknown. And in the native traditions, they call it the great mystery. It's
Right.
the great mystery of your consciousness, right?
Right.
And then there's the relative side. So relative work is very different than deepening into the spiritual aspect of who you are as a being beyond all of that, your personality structure. So
Right.
those two things put together is kind of the magic key to be able to kind of build this relationship with self and deepen in that. And at the same time, understand you also have to do relative work on your ego structure to know how you're going to filter your relationship to that,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. You have to have both to have the balance.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100% that it is, and it's why I teach. Listen, if you're going to
Mhm.
do this powerful psychological inner work, and listen, energetic world is affected by your ego. People think the energetic
Absolutely.
world is not ego. It's all ego.
Mm.
The energetic world is relative, and relative just means programmable. That's all it
Mhm.
means. It's the relative aspect means it's changing. In deep teachings, they call that deep, profound, absolute Shiva, the emptiness. You often hear it
Mhm.
called the void or emptiness, and they call the changing world of relativity Shakti. It's like it's change, it's activity. So it's like the unchanging and the changing. And that's again, because we live in a dualistic plane,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't it amazing as beings? We have the ability to access all of that,
All
right?
of it.
We
Yes.
all of it. I mean,
Yes.
that is the majesty of the human experience, that we have this capacity to tap into this something that is beyond all human experience, and then be able to filter that through channeling that through our relative experience. But remember, like you said, if the filters aren't examined, you unconsciously don't even know how that's going to get filtered if you haven't examined your own personality structure.
Exactly. Yep. I completely agree with you. It's the same thing as with any other thing, it's, let's just say, you start dating, right? You're at a point in your life where you start dating, and you go out with somebody the first time, and they're like really sweet with you, but they're treating the wait staff horribly.
Yes,
It's the
red
same
flag.
kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing. Pay attention to not only how they're treating their students, but to how they're treating other people, including wait staff. Because there's a lot of times, like groups will go out for dinner or coffee or whatever, and pay attention to that. Pay attention to how they're speaking to their families when you're on camera with them and a kid walks in the room. How do they respond to that child? Pay attention to those things, because that will definitely give away where they are personally in their own development.
Yeah, how are they on the stage versus how they're on off the stage, right?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
and what you're really talking about is embodiment. They're
Hmm.
embodying the teachings that they're offering, right?
Right.
And a real teacher, someone who's deeply, sincerely committed to this, and it's not a fun job. Oftentimes, it's a very challenging job to. I mean, it's calling for most people who are doing it. But an
Right.
embodied teacher, there's a kind of transmission, a kind of energy, they radiate the example of who they are, and they
Hmm.
don't have to tell you again and again and again who they are, because they're a living embodiment of it. So, like you
Right.
said, if they're on the stage doing one thing, they get off the stage and they're treating the wait staff and children and people with disrespect, and they're not honoring them, and they're not being honest, and they're being curt with them. You want to pay attention to that, because that's a discrepancy on what they're presenting versus what they are.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
that's that. For me, that word is embodied, and it's very difficult to become embodied and masterful in any skill until you can get it intellectually from a course, but you got to practice it,
Right.
right? you,
And
you've got you got to
got to go
explore it.
deep.
You
Got to
got to
go
go
deep.
deep.
Yeah.
Which is what kind of brings us to that idea of your idea with the mystery schools, Bobby. Like,
Mhm.
because mystery schools were designed to put people into these processes where they had to learn to embody the teachings. You were initiated into a certain level of the mystery school. I mean, this comes from Egypt, it comes from Mesopotamia, it comes from shamanic training, it comes from Mongolia, it comes from Tibet, it comes from India. This is a thing. And these mystery schools would take you into a process with mentorship, right? With guidance. You're not doing this with the etheric. You're doing this with physical human beings who are the embodiment of what they're teaching. And they take you through a process, initiate you into a stage of work. And then you have to demonstrate the embodiment and of capacity, that you have the ability and that you're able to move to the next layer of learning. Now that's almost completely gone from our culture,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mentorship is almost completely gone in this process, and so are the mystery schools. And then, so someone says, "Well, I'm in a mystery school," and I'm like, "Well, they call it a mystery school because you're not putting yourself out into the public until you've attained a certain level of competency, which describes and demonstrates that you're capable of being able to move on. And you don't make that discernment yourself. Your mentors and your teachers who are initiating you make that discernment. You think about the spiritual world now, how many people have gone through a process where they have put themselves in that kind of environment, where they have been trained, and they don't start teaching or exhibiting the talent or putting themselves out into public until the teacher has said, "Hey, you're ready,"
Right.
right?
A lot of this too, because so much of it is online shamanic courses. Oh my
That's the
God.
True.
thing now.
Don't
Yeah.
even get me started.
Yep.
Bobby has heard my rant on this. Don't even get me started on, oh, I went online and I made this mandala or whatever, and now I'm a shaman. Um,
Wow. Is that
let's
what you did,
talk
Marcus? Just asking for a friend.
let's talk cultural appropriation, shall we?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's exactly what it is, and not just with the Native American, but also with the Hindi, and also with the Sufi, and also with, because people see these things and go, oh, well, I can do that.
How cool.
How cool.
Right.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Look, I
Well,
have a drum I ordered on Amazon. I can do that. I'm sorry. No, you cannot do that. And even, but you're out there doing it, you know?
it's true. And that's why I'm like saying to people who take the weekend courses with Reiki or whatever they take, and then they're teaching and they're calling themselves a Reiki master without any training. There's nothing that is integrating the learnings. I mean, we can learn anything from the internet. You can pick up tools and learn stuff. Just because you know it intellectually does not mean you're a living embodiment of it. And it's challenging to become a living embodiment of something so abstract, which touches consciousness in so different ways without somebody guiding you, right? In a way
Right.
that's appropriate. I mean, I come
Yeah.
from the native traditions. My family lives on reservations. My great grandfather was the shaman of the tribe. It was a lineage, and I mean, I spent a year in the forest in Vision Quest, sometimes over 3 or 4 months away from people at all. And then I'm so having done that kind of work.
Mhm.
I mean, and that was nature teaching me, but I was also guided through lineage, through traditions, and through teachers to be able to do that. And I mean, so a lot of people are like, I did a vision quest. I took a day of silence. And I'm like, that's powerful. It gives you insight, but that's not the same thing as being in a mystery school or being in apprenticeship with a
Yeah.
shamanic practitioner or going through a process over the course of several years to learn something until you integrate it as part of who you are, right?
Right.
And the thing is this is why a teacher is important, because the teacher will say to their student, you're ready. I can feel the transmission of this embodied energy in you. You are becoming and you are acting as an embodied aspect of your teachings. I had a student recently who said to me, I didn't agree with you, so I went and did what I wanted to do anyways. I'm like, well, then why would you ask and get the guidance of the teacher, and the teacher says you're not ready? Why wouldn't you trust them if you chose them as a teacher, and then you would then go off and do what you want to do anyways? And this is the arrogance of the inauthentic handler. They're not interested in actually deepening in the teaching. They're looking for something else to commoditize in order to uplift their personality and their status so they can present it out, usually, like you said, Bobby, to make money.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge, because people are like, well, then spiritual stuff should be free. And I'm like, that's not fair either, because this is a talent and a commodity. This is a thing that someone has learned and invested 20 years on, 15 years or 5 years of studying. Like would you think dentistry or doctors should be free too? Because I mean, they had to train, they had to go through a university course, they had to go through apprenticeships in terms of learning, they had to study with other doctors. This is what the spiritual community is lacking in our modern world. We can just grab information and then people take it in their minds and they think that they can teach it. And they may be teaching it from an intellectual level, but they may not necessarily be embodying it.
And then there's the value of the energy exchange.
Yes, there is.
The energy exchange is important because people don't value what they don't give something for.
Absolutely. People say, well, shamans don't get, true living shamans don't get an energy exchange. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I come from a tradition. You don't even get to go to the medicine man or medicine woman to make an offering. And the entire tribe is taking care of them because they know the value of the counsel that they're offering. So, yes, there's an exchange of energy because the entire tribe gives them money. They give them clothes, they give them food, and they give them the support so they can go deep into the spiritual learning so they can provide that service for the community. So people would
Yes,
say, oh, yeah, but all that stuff is free. It's not free. There is an exchange. There is a deep respect for the person who's pursuing that kind of thing because the
exactly.
tribe knows they need that kind of counsel. They want somebody who's tapped in and who's done the work to go deep into that experience. And then they offer the value they offer is respected by the community. So,
Hmm.
yes, in our world, since money is the exchange, it happens to be the way we have to exchange our talent. But so people say, well, then it should be free. That's not the answer to the question,
No,
right?
There is
no,
no value to
absolutely
free.
not.
There's very little to no
Oftentimes,
value.
right. So, I mean, this is the
Yeah.
thing with, and again, watch your teachers. Are they pontificating? Are they grandstanding? So let's talk about it. Name dropping. Oh my God. I mean, like, how many people name drop to elevate their status, right? I
Mhm.
worked with this person. I studied with that person. I know that person, right?
Yeah.
That's credibility by association, right? I mean, there's a reason I don't talk about the names of any of my teachers. Because I mean, the value and the presence of your work should be the demonstration of your capacity to be able to do what you're doing. Like your embodied energy is speaks for itself. Like a mature teacher is an embodiment of what they're learning, but a mature teacher also really deeply respects the process of learning, right? They are very diligent when you're acquiring new tools or new ideas. They practice that, they master that before they ever put it public. So an immature teacher will take it and then immediately posture it out. That's not an embodied teaching, right? And a mature teacher is discerning. They're careful with you, they're cautious with you, they're not cavalier, they're not reckless, they're not trying new things to see what happens. That type of behavior is not caring about who you are. That's more about them than it is about you. It's self-indulgent, right? So on the surface, they may seem like they know what they're doing, but they often don't. And that is what I call a shadow teacher, because it's more about themselves and their image and their adding to their resume of what they do rather than you. And so you'll know a teacher who's cautious about, they're cautious, they're careful. That's a respect of the fact that they have the privilege to be able to work with an individual, and they know that they're being a trusted individual. So they're not going to be reckless and cavalier with you as a student. Absolutely not. You know? So I mean, that again comes back to that idea of being embodied. You can learn. Some of the best teachers, and I believe this fully, were incredibly good students.
Yeah.
It's very rare for you to see a really, really, really good teacher who wasn't a good student, because that is how they got to how to be a good teacher.
Right.
You know, so I met this individual recently who was literally bragging about the fact that they postured their way through school. Like they stole content, sold it to other people, had this whole racket going on with homework. And they said, isn't it wonderful that I was able to get my whole degree and do barely any work? And I was in my head, I was going, oh my God, how did yes, you conned the whole system to get what you wanted, to get that piece of paper, but you're not embodiment of what you said you studied.
Right.
And that will reflect in their teachings. Eventually it'll come out.
Right.
Eventually.
And you know, I have to say, in some of my, I have a certain number of students that where we do a class. It's been a while, but usually it was once a month, and they challenged me. Like my students challenged me, and that was set up on purpose, you know, because let's say in June, I did a class on past life regression. Okay. We're talking about advanced students. We're not talking about beginning students. Okay. They get to choose the topic for the next month. And very often that gives me time to do some research, because they have come up with stuff I had no idea about. But
don't you love that?
I love that.
Yeah,
I
see,
love it. But
that
I'm going
demonstrates
into it not knowing much, but I'm not lying about it.
exactly.
I'm going in saying, I don't know anything about this, but let's check it out together.
But see, this is the thing. The fact that you love to be challenged also demonstrates the authenticity of your desire to learn. Because you know, as teachers, being a teacher is one of the most profound ways to learn content. And I mean, again, for me, that's why I'm like, Q&A is awesome, because it offers me the opportunity to dive deeper into my understanding and knowing and resonance and consciousness, to be able to share and explain and be able to work with the things that are given, especially if it's something I don't know. But you often hear teachers who say, it's, again, you said the most powerful thing. You're like, I didn't know. Right. And there are a lot of teachers who are like, they act like they know, which is a kind of posturing. Just be honest about the fact you don't know it.
Right.
Or you have to explore it, or you're exploring it together as part of your student and teacher relationship. Like when my wife and I do retreats, we're doing a retreat in June. And when we do a retreat, we do the entire retreat with each other before we ever present it to other people. And before we've ever done it together with each other, we've often been using the material and the techniques as a level of mastery for years before we feel comfortable teaching it to other people. And there's stuff that my wife does that I won't touch, because she's masterful as a yogi and as a Kundalini teacher and as a profound meditative teacher and a sadhana teacher in ways that I am not. And you will hear me say, that's her expertise. I'm going to step aside, let her do this with you, because she has far more mastery and she embodies it in a more profound way than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's things where I do, and she's like, this is Marcus's thing. This is where he embodies and masterful. He's masterful in this. He embodies that. He's going to teach this part of it. And when she's teaching it, I'm a student.
Right.
I'm a student to
Exactly.
her because
Exactly.
I have enough humility to realize that she exhibits the embodied mastery in that in a way that I do not. So, the inauthentic handler, you won't hear that about them.
Right.
That you won't hear that you will not hear them talk that way.
You are correct.
They'll say stuff like this. They'll say, this is some of the things I hear them say. I only wanted to share it because it was so powerful and it changed my life. And I'm like, well, consider, can you really change something? Can you really, really say something changed your life if it wasn't applied, it wasn't practiced, and it wasn't integrated into your being? Or, I mean, anything can be taught from a space of inauthenticity, but it will lack integrity. It'll be incomplete, and it will be potentially dangerous because they think they know more, or they're posturing that they know more than they do. And they often know they don't.
Yeah.
That's the
Exactly.
difference of someone who's doing this authentically or someone who's sincere about it. And the fact that you said, like,
Yeah.
I didn't know. I had to go look it up. I had to figure it out. I had to work with that. And
Yeah.
and you're being challenged. And that's like you're saying, like, that's when a teacher will not allow themselves to be challenged by their students, where they keep the students in a particular place where they never really ever grow to become an empowered version of yourself. That's somebody who just wants to be the top of the show.
Right. And there's just one other thing that just popped in real quick into my mind. Um, I don't have, I've been taking notes, but I didn't start out with notes here today. But when a teacher doesn't know the answer and they don't address that they don't know the answer,
Yes,
that that to me is such a red flag. It is
I
such a
I
red flag.
agree.
It's like if you don't know the answer, I don't know every answer. Give me a break. I don't know every answer, but I am more than willing to say I don't know, but I can find out.
Right.
Right. For instance, I would never even consider teaching physical therapy. Like
Right.
I do not understand the muscle system of the body. I am not a trainer. I mean, when people tell me, well, talk to me about physical health, I'm like, let me point you towards somebody who has mastery in that area. When you're talking about consciousness and the inner work and working with meditative skills and sadhana practices, yes, I can talk to you. And there are many things I don't know that I'm learning and that I will continue to learn and evolve. And if that's the other part of, like you said, if the
Mhm.
teacher is not in their own learning process, then they're here and they're posturing this position. They're not interested necessarily in the depth of continuing to evolve themselves as a being. I mean,
Right.
it's to me that's your red flag about not being people not being willing to admit that they don't know something. My red flag is someone's not in continual training with as a teacher,
Exactly.
which is again back to the mystery school, back to the teacher, back to the mentorship, back to the way that we garner information as a commodity rather than embody it as a transmission of who we are as a being.
Right.
Um, I mean, and as far as gurus are concerned, having been around probably about 20 or 30 enlightened beings, I can tell you the process of enlightenment and accessing that part of self, it does nothing to do with working on your inner work and your psychology. I have had gurus come to me and say, I want to train with you in terms of understanding the personality structure because the process of enlightenment that I've gone through does not include this in the game.
Right.
Right. And then the crazy thing about, because a lot of people think enlightenment means you got it down. No, you've achieved a specific kind of attained relationship with that self that's outside of relativity. And that doesn't mean that you've worked on your ego. It doesn't mean you understand your wounds. It doesn't mean that you're mature. It doesn't mean you have a full understanding of the different parts of your consciousness. So
Right.
again, back to the whole thing with them, then you attain this energy, you attain this specific state of mastery in a particular area. That can actually be a detriment to working on the other parts of you because you can bypass it, right?
Right.
Like you were talking about spiritual bypassing. How many people
Yeah.
spiritual bypass?
A lot of people
How do you
spiritual
define it,
bypass.
Christina?
Yeah.
Bobby, how would you guys define spiritual bypassing? How do you see it?
I can equate a lot of this, and as you were talking, I have a black belt in Taekwondo in mixed
Right.
martial arts. My teacher was Korean, and he was a seventh degree black belt. His brother was an eight. And as a black belt now, I am qualified to teach after 5 years of training, unless we embody all of those movements and are tested and break a number of boards and do, everything that we're supposed to do, we're not allowed to teach. So you have to go through all of the lessons
The
and
initiations.
right. And albeit they have to be baby steps so that you are able to teach all of that stuff and to know exactly that when you move this muscle, that one moves. Now, in the beginning of the class, he always did a lesson, something spiritual. At the end of our class, he did another one. And it was always very positive. He never once ever pretended to be something he wasn't. If he couldn't teach it, he would have someone else give you that lesson. We were to train with other people, other students, and that's how we trained. But in terms of bypassing all of that, my favorite thing is, and Christina will attest to this, my favorite line is people just make shit up. That's how they bypass things. Someday, my cup here that says breakfast, it should say people just make shit up, because that's how they do it. They just make it up and make you believe that they do it. And now you're sitting there with all your education questioning whether or not it is the truth. And unless you really do your homework on it, and sometimes when you are questioning in your head, you keep doing the same old thing, thinking that it's going to change, and it's not.
No.
Believe your gut. Believe what you know to be true.
Right.
I love
And
that.
for me,
I love the fact that you went through that whole initiation process. That speaks of the integrity of the process of learning, and the integrity of the teacher, and the integrity of the student.
Well, and it wasn't all pleasant. It was not all pleasant.
No, I walked part of that journey with her. I can tell you
Yeah.
it wasn't all pleasant.
Yeah.
But it never is. I mean, it's not all pleasant to go through an initiation process like that. Like, my annoyance with the online shaman thing, right?
Oh.
First of all, I don't know one real shaman who actually calls themselves a shaman. They won't do it. They won't do it. The other thing is, as far as spiritual bypassing, it's when someone focuses, they like skip over doing any of the shadow work. They skip over doing any of that inner work, and they only focus on the positive, and it's all positive thinking. And positive thinking is great, but you got work to do too. And if you don't do the work, that's spiritual bypassing. When it's just focusing on the positive thinking thing, like, there's been that whole for like 20 or 30 years now, this whole movement about positive thinking, and I am all for positive thinking, but I'm also all for doing the work and being real.
I think the word that I love, you talked about integrity, Bobby, in terms of the spiritual, in terms of bypassing, and you used the word real. And I think those two things combined together, the idea of this integrity of the process of learning, where you're respecting the process and the initiations, which are never comfortable. I mean, let's be clear, no initiation is comfortable because it's challenging your belief system. You have to, I mean, the magic happens at the far end of the comfort zone, right? I mean, that's where the magic happens.
Yes.
That's where you're pushing beyond your paradigm of what you believe. And then getting real is not just about everything that's positive and everything that's wonderful. It's about understanding the whole being, the woundedness, the shadow, the radiance, and the maturity. That's the way I define it, which is your way of saying you get real with who you are, what you're capable of, and what you want to avoid doing because it's uncomfortable. Because I mean, spiritual bypass is the avoidance of discomfort, which is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
It's absolutely necessary for the training process, right?
I couldn't agree more.
So we see this, and we see that, and then the posturing comes from the bypass.
Yes.
Because if you've bypassed something, and if you've bypassed the desire to really own a part of what you're capable of, I mean, or what you can do, or what the darker parts of your consciousness are, which, by the way, everybody has. There's not one human being on the planet that doesn't have a shadow. Every one of us does. It's the nature of it's the nature of our human development as just the way our personality is defined. I had a teacher who once said to me, we need the fragmentation of our personality because the light of consciousness shines into the fragmentation, and each of the different fragments reflect back opportunities for development.
I love that.
So the fragmentation is literally how we grow and evolve in the relative world as beings. That's how we become integrated. Because as you reflect into these fragmented parts of consciousness, you also get to reclaim each of those pieces and integrate them into awareness. They never go away. You don't rub them out and scrub them out. You integrate them, you become intimate with them, you learn what your relationship is to them, and then you develop tools that when that stuff comes up in you, you have mature tools on how to deal with it.
Exactly.
Avoiding shadow work is one of the most dangerous things for a teacher to do because
Well,
it will come out in your teaching.
yeah, and let's not sugarcoat it. It's not easy. There's nothing easy about any of this crap.
No.
No.
Which is why those mystery schools used to take you through processes where people were nurturing you and guiding you through the process. Shamanic training is not a 1 week process in a course. It's years and years and years of mentorship with somebody who already embodies that and then can keep you on track and show you, hey, you're not embodied in that area. Here's work you have to do. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Or
And
that's the same with psychic mediumship. I mean, you have to go through intense amounts of training and study to become adept. You may have to listen, talent doesn't mean mastery, by the way. A lot of people think just because you're talented, you have mastery. That's not necessarily true. You know, there's a great video about Ed Sheeran he was interviewed by I can't remember the guy who interviewed him, but the guy who was interviewing him said, "Isn't it great that you just kind of came out and you could sing?" And he's like, "Dude, no way." He goes, and he pulled out a video from him singing at 17 years old, and it was not that very good. It wasn't very good. His song.
I saw that.
You saw that.
Yeah.
Who was the teacher who interviewed him? It was I forget his name.
Yeah, I
it
forgot
was,
to.
Yeah, but he said, "Listen," he goes, I had to develop becoming in tune, learning my craft." He goes, "There was talent, right? But mastery is not the same as talent. Raw talent has to be crafted and cultivated into an integrated, embodied way to experience mastery." Now he gets on stage and he can just sit and on the stage, open the mic and sing. But that didn't happen overnight. That happened through years and years and years of devoted hours of practice. There's a saying that it takes 10,000 hours of practice in a specific vocation to have a level of mastery at it. You've ever heard that term, the 10,000 hours of something, which is why you had to go through years of training with embodied masters to become at the level of martial arts that you are, which is why I had to go through years of training with spiritual gurus, living in an ashram for 11 years, being saturated in that energy, which is why you had to go through years of training as a psychic, as a medium, as a teacher, as a coach, for us to be able to exhibit mastery. Talent and mastery are not the same thing.
No,
they are not.
And talent is the beginning. And I liked what you had to say about the magic happens at the end of your comfort zone. Yeah, well, this is when you realize magic is not comfortable.
It's true. I mean, real magic. Yet pushing you outside of your existing reality requires you to be uncomfortable. I would say it's a spiritual necessity to be uncomfortable in order to grow. Because if you're too comfortable and you're just pulling it in and putting it out, and there's no real comfort, you are living in the same paradigm you've always been living in. Because the only way to push through your paradigm out into something new, more other and beyond, is you're going to have to cross that threshold where you're challenging everything about who you think you are.
Absolutely. And we are going to have to end with that because we are overtime. And imagine that we're overtime, which means you get to come back again, Markus. Yay. So I also wanted to just let everyone know again, if you want a mug, let us know. Markus, there will be a mug on its way to you.
Excellent.
You're almost now part of the regular show. So thank you again for being here. And I always really enjoy having you here. And Bobby, thank you for introducing Markus to the rest of us, because
you got to pass on the good teachers. That's how
got to pass them on. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So
thank you so much for having me here. The conversation, I love being here. It's such an open, fluid, really, really sincere space, which is why I want to keep coming back, because these spaces are rare, and you guys provide this very beautiful opportunity to explore ideas that aren't necessarily open in the conventional world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
And it's really interesting because we literally talk about everything from grandparenthood to gardening to food to to deep spiritual concepts and
And seeing
beyond.
spirits, yes.
Yes. And so I just want to thank you again for joining us, Marcus. And
Thank you.
for those of you who are watching, listening, like, subscribe, hit the bell to follow us. We have more great programming coming because we're always looking for interesting people. If you want to be a guest, get a hold of us. Let's talk about it. And Bobby, what else do you have to add?
Well, again, Marcus, I want to thank you so much for giving your time and effort and love to us and being willing to talk frankly about things so people learn and learn to be able to discern what's going on in life. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to click the button. We love listening to you guys. We love hearing from you. So let us know if there's a guest you want to see. Click the button, subscribe to our channel, and we hope to have Marcus back in the next few months. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for
Yes.
coming.
And if you want to leave a comment, we do go back and read those. So awesome.
Thanks again.
All right. See you next week.